Kia is a brand that has been undergoing major changes over the last few years, and all of their models are very fresh. In fact, the current generation Kia Sportage, and that would be the 2016 model year Sportage, is really only 5 years old. And therefore, it's even more surprising that this all-new 2017 Kia Sportage is not a refresh of that 2016 model. This is actually an all-new Kia Sportage. There are two different front-end looks. If you get the all-wheel drive one, we get this particular front-end look, which actually raises the front end up a tiny bit to give you better approach and departure angles. You can see that the front-wheel drive trim actually has a more blunt front end. So we have this slot here that we don't have in the all-wheel drive model, and this splitter right down below that we also don't have in the all-wheel drive model. It's most noticeable in the side profile, where the all-wheel drive model actually starts slanting back right about here to give it, again, those better approach and departure angles. The overall design seems to be a little bit of Porsche Macan meets Kia Sorento, with these headlamps that are mounted very high on the front end and the overall swooping style. At 176.4 inches long, the Sportage is smaller than something like a RAV4 or a CR-V, or even that metal mammoth that's right there behind the car. This is actually one of the more compact entries in this compact crossover segment, although it is still larger than something like a Mazda CX-3 or a Honda HR-V. The extra width that we see in this platform definitely gives the Sportage a lower and wider look than we see in something like the Ford Escape, the RAV4, or the CR-V. As you probably know, the Sportage and the Hyundai Tucson are actually close cousins with one another. However, this has always been the sportier cousin, and that continues for this year, because the Hyundai Tucson gets a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, and this one gets a base 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine, producing 181 horsepower and 175 pound-feet of torque. However, if this is not enough oomph for you, then Kia will still sell you a 2-liter turbocharged version. This is a new 2-liter Turbo 4 for the Sportage. It produces 240 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, and all-wheel drive is optional. Inside, we get a new front seat design, and our SX model has 2-way adjustable power lumbar support and a multi-way power driver's seat. Although the Sportage is smaller on the outside than the RAV4 by a few inches, on the inside, the combined legroom, that would be front row plus second row, is only 1/10 of an inch different than that RAV4. That means that sitting right here behind myself with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I still have several inches of legroom. When it comes to cargo capacity, you'll find just over 30 cubic feet of space in the Sorento, and that is a little bit surprising since, again, this is smaller than some of the competition. It means I had no problem with large roller bags like that, and this load floor actually can be adjusted into 2 different heights. In case you're wondering, you will find a compact spare tire right there under the cargo load floor, and you could put a small amount of cargo around it. The overall design is reminiscent of Kia's other products. The upper portion is a soft touch material, this lower portion is all hard touch plastic. Between these 2 large air vents, we do have the 8-inch color touchscreen infotainment system inside this cabin. This now uses a capacitive touchscreen instead of a resistive touchscreen. That means that when you put your finger on it and you drag things around, you don't see sort of a rainbow effect as you're pressing in on the screen. There's also a slightly smaller 7-inch color touchscreen, and the base model uses a 5-inch color touchscreen that does not support Android Auto and CarPlay. Taking a closer look at the center of the dashboard, you can see that we have quite a large number of buttons. These are basically the same buttons that we see in every other Kia with their UVO system. Below the climate control buttons, we have another bank of buttons, and this is where you'll find things like the ventilated seat controls, heated seat controls, and the heated steering wheel control. The instrument cluster is very similar to what we see in other Kia models. We have red needles, black faces, and white numbers. The Sportage gets Kia's latest sporty steering wheel design with this flat bottom right down here, large hand grips right up top, and of course sport grips lower as well. The center section is perforated leather, and the top and the bottom sections are not. You'll also notice that our SX model has paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel, up on the right side, down on the left, and of course you'll find the keyless start button right behind the steering wheel. Out on the road, it's obvious that Kia was going for something a little bit sportier than the average entry in this segment with the 2017 Sportage. We ran from 0 to 60 in the all-wheel drive version in 7.5 to 7.6 seconds. Now, I obviously haven't been able to 0 to 60 test this on our normal test track under the normal conditions, so do keep that in mind before comparing this directly with some of our other test comparisons. In our initial braking tests, we ran from 60 to 0 in 124 feet, which is right about the same as the Toyota RAV4 with the same width tires on it. Handling is definitely something the Sportage has long excelled at, and that's true for this 2017 model. Now, we do have an electric power steering assist system in this vehicle, so we don't have a whole lot of feel from the front tires. Even though we do have an electric power assist system in the Mazda CX-5, you get an awful lot more feedback through the steering column than we find in this Sportage. However, I would actually posit that this is likely going to handle better than the Mazda CX-5. The CX-5 doesn't have terribly wide tires. One thing's for certain, this is definitely faster than the last CX-5 that we tested. Mazda's CX-5, especially in base trim, is one of the slowest entries in the segment. Now, tire size does increase when you go from the base LX model on up to the SX model. LX and EX get 225 width tires, the SX gets 245 width tires. However, the lower end models still handle quite well because they're considerably lighter than the model we're testing here. They're about 700 pounds lighter if you get the front wheel drive LX model versus the top end all-wheel drive SX. The ride in the Sportage has definitely improved over the last generation model, but if you're looking for a soft and compliant highway ride, you're looking at the wrong vehicle. You should be looking at something like a Honda or the Nissan Rogue. Those are going to give you a more polished highway type ride. The SX all-wheel drive model that was spent most of our time in today averages about 21 miles per gallon according to the EPA, but if you're driving aggressively, you should expect that to be in the high teens. Now, the Sportage is one of the sportier and more dynamic entries in this segment, so you could consider that just the toll to be paid for the fun that you can get out of the 2-liter turbocharged engine, but you will find slightly better fuel economy even in something like a Forester XT, which has about the same kind of power under the hood, will go from 0 to 60 a little bit faster, and handles almost as well. The other thing that plays into the low fuel economy numbers, especially on the all-wheel drive versions of the Sportage, is the way this all-wheel drive system behaves. According to Kia, this spends an awful lot more time transmitting power to the rear axle than some of the competitive systems. Options out there, especially like the Jeep Cherokee, if it's in its default mode, will not send any power to the rear axle unless the vehicle is at full throttle or there is wheel slip up front. This vehicle is always trying to send some power to the rear. Unfortunately, while that gives the Sportage a very different feel out on the road than most of the competition, it is going to be less efficient. As we've come to expect from Kia, they have priced the 2017 Sportage very aggressively, and you'll actually see this in dealer lots right around the same time that you're watching this video. The base LX model will start at $22,990. Now, in case you're wondering, that is still a decent amount below the least expensive Sorento. The EX model, which I think is going to be the most popular trim for the Sportage, is $25,550. If you want the top-end SX trim, that's $32,500, and you can add all-wheel drive to all three trims for $1,500. Now, on that pricing chart, the LX and the EX will get the 2.4-liter engine under the hood, and the SX gets this 2-liter turbo. The EX model is very, very well equipped. It comes with standard leather, fog lamps, solar control glass on the front of the vehicle. The front seats are heated, and the driver's seat is powered as well. In addition, we get the smart key and a 7-inch LCD in the dashboard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, you should know that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay may be late availability, so your vehicle will come from the dealer. It may not support that, but you can upgrade that by about April. The SX model upgrades that 7-inch in-dash LCD to an 8-inch touchscreen display, again supporting Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We also get the 2-liter turbocharged engine under the hood, the steering HID headlamps, and these wide 245 width tires. All the features that are optional on the EX also become standard on the SX. If you add all the options to your SX, you'll end up just over $35,000. Of course, it is before destination charges. In a nutshell, the Sportage is still one of the sportier entries in this segment. Base models are quite light for this segment at around 3,300 pounds in front-wheel drive trim. They handle very well compared to the average competition. The base trims even handle well compared to something like a Ford Escape or base trims of the Volkswagen Tiguan, which are also excellent handling vehicles. They still have the relatively wide 225 width tires in those base models, and that definitely helps. The up-level SX trim that we've been testing here has that 2-liter turbocharged engine with more power under the hood than you find in a wide variety of the competition. In fact, if you want this kind of power, you will have to move over to something like a 2-liter EcoBoost Ford Escape or a 2-liter turbocharged Subaru Forester XT. Now, this is going to cost you more than the Forester XT or the base EcoBoost version of that Ford Escape. However, you're going to get more feature content on the inside than the competition. Obviously, the trade-off for the sporty handling that we see, especially in this SX model, is that the ride is not going to be as plush as we find in the RAV4, the CR-V, or the Nissan Rogue. If a soft ride is your thing, those would be better options. Likewise, we don't have a cargo area that's nearly as large as those larger entries in this segment. The RAV4 especially has an enormous cargo area that's about 33% larger than we find in the Sportage. However, Kia has actually made this vehicle very efficient. They've really shortened and tightened the front end and tightened the back end to give you the most interior space and cargo space possible for the exterior size. You'll actually only find 1/10 of an inch more rear legroom in the RAV4 than you find in the Sportage, despite this being several inches shorter. My bottom line is that the all-wheel drive version of this top-end trim and the Mazda CX-5 also in top-end trim tie for tops in this segment for me. They're kind of different vehicles, however. This is going to be faster, but it's not going to have the same kind of engaging road feel that we find in the CX-5, although this is going to handle a little bit better than the CX-5 in my estimation. Now, I haven't had time to road test this at home, so it's a little bit difficult to tell at this moment, but the suspension is definitely a little bit better sorted than we find in the CX-5. We also get gobs more power. Now, the CX-5 not only has a slightly better steering feel, but it also has better fuel economy. So if fuel economy or steering feel are higher on your list than they are on mine, then you may want to put that Mazda above the Sportage. However, if 0 to 60 acceleration and absolute handling numbers, or even some of the luxury features that we get on the inside are higher on your list, then put this above the Mazda. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dyke. Click that subscribe button down there. Find us over at thetruthAboutCars.com, and I'll see you next week.